Cash Flow Code. And my guest today is Jack Flaherty. He's the CEO and founder of the Decision Switch and the author of Better Decisions, Better Outcomes. So I'm kind of curious about that. So let's bring Jack on and we'll talk about better decisions and getting better outcomes. Hey Jack, how are you today?
Doing fantastic. I want to clarify real quickly that we did rebrand the book as The Decision Switch, just because of the emotion that it compels. But
Ah,
appreciate you having me on your show.
yeah, well, that was the information you guys sent me. So there you go. Excuse me, sorry about that.
No
Um,
worries.
so let's talk about empathy because I think that's a big deal and it's not often talked about in business. So where does empathy fit in with effective decision making?
I love that you started with that particular question. It's a thread that I've woven throughout the entire book, as well as my speaking. Empathy is such an important aspect for decision making because so often, we look at corporate goals, we look at our personal goals, and we make the best decisions we can. But even the best decisions sometimes do have negative implications for those that they do affect. And in those situations, it's important for us to really understand that level of impact and help those individuals. Number one, it builds our own legacy because I can't begin to tell you how many people I've helped. Having worked in consulting in the Big Four for a long time, I've seen a lot of colleagues come and go. And one of the things that I always make sure I do is when they do leave, is reach out and say, "How can I help you?" And when I had my own consulting company 10 years ago, I was blessed to never have to actually ever sell work because I reached out. People knew that I was a good person and I meant the best of intentions for whatever decision I had to make.
Okay, so how is that empathetic? Just out of curiosity.
Empathetic is the idea that you place yourself in another's shoes. You try to understand, their emotions, their feelings, the change that they're going to have to make as a result of a decision. Whether it's asking someone to move a location because it's a business need, if you have to let someone go because of a downsizing of an organization, or we just came off of COVID, where you had exploding manufacturing for very products, which really constrained our supply chain, and manufacturers had to selectively decide how to fulfill orders, whether to give a complete order to a particular customer or to reduce, for better words, the rations for what they would provide their existing customer base. And so understanding those implications, how it's going to affect them, and really carve out a very succinct message that shows that you understand. You help them understand why you had to make that decision, but then you also look for methods that you can help them out of their situation as well.
So where do questions fit into empathy?
Ah, I think an open dialogue is essential because part of it is inquiring about the status of the individual, but vice versa, providing an open door, being transparent, allowing them to ask you questions as well, because I think that that open door shows that you are flexible, you are thinking, and you are trying to be a productive leader. And particularly as we think about entrepreneurs or small companies, your brand, your name, your customer loyalty is everything. I mean, I look at my father's business, and that's how he built his entire business. Was folks could trust the answers that he would give them, but vice versa, he was an open book. You asked him any question, and he would directly and confidently and without question give you the answer that he either felt was right or was the correct answer.
So here's what my experience is it's great to have an open door and it's great to answer questions and it's great to do all that stuff. But in my experience, most employees or most team members, which I like that term better actually, are afraid of asking the boss a question. And they're especially afraid of disagreeing with the boss.
Sure.
So, in my experience, that if you're going to be an empathetic leader, It's up to you to open the door to your mind by asking them good questions about what they're thinking.
Oh, absolutely. And if you give me a moment, I'd love to expand on it.
Yeah,
That's
please.
a fundamental concept of the decision switch. It's not just about the individual, even though I did write it with the intent of an individual, bettering themselves. There's also threads about culture because I don't think it's just the leader. I think it's the culture that you cultivate because disagreement can be good. It's not always a negative thing to have a boardroom.
I think it's mostly positive, but that's we can we'll digress in that in a minute. But continue. Sorry.
Sure, but having a culture where we can freely ask questions of one another, regardless of what level we are in the organization, if we've got a valid perspective or we have a valid question, is a very healthy thing to do. And enabling your employees to really understand does a couple of things. One, it provides a much more loyal and supportive employee, but it also creates an opportunity where they may come up with ideas that you as the leader may never even thought of. And so, cultivating that open culture of conversation and questioning and those types of aspects, I think is extremely productive. And again, whether we're talking about major corporations or startups, where it may be a few individuals, allowing to have that discourse is crucial in protecting you from your blind spots, but also identifying opportunities for growth and doing things better.
Yeah. So in my experience, I might ask you a question, and because I'm kind of a tough guy, in other words, I'm very blunt with how I go about doing things. You've already had an experience of that. Um, is that you have to read body language.
Sure.
And when you're talking to somebody and you ask them a question and you see them give a closed body response where they're trying to figure out what you want to hear, it's incumbent on the leader, in my opinion, to say, gee, it looks like you might not agree with that. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. But there is a tact also in doing that. I've learned if you come too direct in calling out somebody's body language, it almost exacerbates the issue. But if there's ways that you can tease out, hey Kathy, hey Bob, what is your thoughts about whatever the subject is? You purposely are pulling them back into the conversation, and you're showing them that you consciously are interested in what they have to say, and it really drives again a more productive conversation. And I think even if someone's body language is off-putting or it's not, I think it's a good way to manage meetings and stay in, for better words, control as the leader, is to purposely not let somebody hog the microphone. And so being able to bring the conversation around the room by purposely asking questions, because body language doesn't give away everything, but I think you're right. I think it clearly does give clear indications that someone may either be listening or maybe completely walled off.
Well, I actually do think it gives you, I mean, only 7% of communications is words, 20 some odd percent is vocal tone, and the rest is body language. So, body language is over 50% of a communication. And in my experience, nobody comes to work with us as a team member without having a history that comes before them.
Sure.
And it's rare that you go into what I would call an empathetic company. And by an empathetic company, what I mean is that people are really interested in what you have to think. They really want you to participate with your ideas. And most employees or team members just don't believe it when they walk in the door.
I think for the most part, in my experience, I'd say you're probably 99% correct. With that said,
There's always an exception, by the way.
yeah, when you have leaders, and I have, there's a couple of stories that I know where CEOs or CFOs or somebody from the executive reaches down several layers and just sends a welcome email and just says flat out, "I have an open door. If you have questions, come have a conversation with me." And I have worked at firms where it was flat out, there was an open door policy where there was hours where they were at their desk, you had free reign to walk in and have a conversation. And so part of that is window dressing. But I think where you're really driving at is the actual individual themselves, their actions, their communications, and they really show that through their communication. But I agree with you without a doubt.
I
It's
I actually think you have to show it through your actions because in my experience, again, this is just my experience, your team members never really listen to what you say, but they do watch what you do. And if your actions show that you're open and, just sending an email is great. That's a nice start. But do your actions show that you really do have a policy where you want to listen and you're curious about what other people have to say? And that curiosity is really important. It's kind of in many cases, in my experience, is beaten out of us by the time we're about 20 years old.
true. Having played sports for most of my life, might even be younger than that.
Well, it depends. Today's sports is different than the sports when I was here, when I was young enough to do that. That's a different conversation altogether. But the
Sure.
truth is, um, empathy sort of goes along with vulnerability. Does that make sense to you?
Um, Bring me along a little bit more before I
Okay,
respond.
well, here's what if I'm going to be an empathetic leader, I have to make myself vulnerable. I have to talk about my foibles. I have to talk about what I've done wrong. I have to let people know that I've not been perfect and I'm not perfect and I'm trying to learn and I need your help. I mean, I can tell you my own story, which was absolutely true, was I was the worst boss of all times. I used to scream at people every single day of the week for the first 5 years I owned my company. And then I finally figured out that was not very effective. And I really made a switch almost immediately saying, okay, I need to start listening. Do you think anybody in my company believed me?
On the onset, no. But I think over time, you cultivate that, and
Right.
so seeing your connection with the vulnerability, I think going back to one of my earlier responses is creating that dialogue. It's a two-way dialogue. Um, as we look at whether providing objective feedback or just talking about postmortem on a project, yeah,
Yeah.
there's got to be ways where you can provide your team feedback, but also open the door and saying were there things that I could have done better,
Yeah.
getting more prepared, making sure
Yeah.
that we get better project planning in place, those types of things. And so, and even personalities in delivery, I think it's essential, and it's something that I've always incorporated with my teams.
One of the things I love is I love a, a part of Scrum, which is is used by software companies mostly to develop software, but it happens to be an incredible project management tool for about anything. And at the end of a sprint, which is a 2 or 3 week period, and I'm saying this for our listeners, by the way, I'm assuming you know this, you have a retrospective where you look back over the last couple of weeks and say, and you ask 3 questions to your team. First question is, what did you love about the work that we did over the last sprint? Question two is, what did you hate about the work we did over the last sprint? And question three is, what would have to change for the work that you hated to become work that you love? And that last question is is absolutely in my favorite question to ask in that sort of any project planning thing that we've done when we're looking back at what happened. Because the truth is, our job as a leader, and this is where empathy comes in, is to make life easy for the people who work for us.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. I would that the last question is always a great one because you can see the cogs turning,
Right.
because I'm trying to figure out how do you transition from one side to the other. And the way that you have, I would say, defined or confined the notion of empathy. It's that it's not just when a major event has happened and you have to deliver bad news, but it's the general notion of having that bidirectional communication and understanding the situation, the tones, the emotions of your team, but as well as being open, as you said, to that feedback, because I don't think you or I would be in the places that we're at if we hadn't been open at some point of our careers to constructive feedback. And I think that's hugely important.
Yeah, I just think you just said something hugely important, by the way, which is bi-directional communication. Too often, you say we want to listen, but the truth is leaders often don't want to listen. They want to talk and they want other people to listen. I mean, I know a guy who runs a very successful company and he brings his management team in, supposedly to have a meeting. And it really becomes an hour and a half lecture for whatever he happens to be thinking about at that particular time. And there's no way that's good communication. And there's no way the people on that team, that leadership team, are going to tell him what they're really thinking.
Sure. And I think there's also, one step further than that is really instilling within your culture the notion of presence. Because so often you find yourself, particularly when it's a contentious discussion, thinking about what you will say next. And during that period, you are completely blocked off to what's going on in the conversation versus allowing the other person, to express whatever they have to share, acknowledge that you need a moment to process that, and then be able to come back with a communication. And again, this goes back to empathy and understanding body language and being able to effectively communicate, is to allow that thought process to happen, allow that communication process to happen. And that's what really cultivates great and productive results.
Yeah. And my belief is most of the time, people know the answer that needs to be done, that needs to be brought out of them.
Sure.
And the best way to do that is you ask questions. And
Absolutely.
you keep asking questions. One of my favorite thing is, something goes wrong and says, okay, what did we learn from that? And a lot of times people will say, I don't know. So my next question is, and I don't know, by the way, usually is what people, well, it's often what people say, and it's usually what the managers will accept as an answer.
Well,
So,
it's
which
a
is
defensive posture. It's a
right,
defensive posture. I don't want to answer you, so I'm just going to say I don't know.
right. So my next question is, if you did know, what would it be? And guess what happens when I say ask that question a lot?
this, the door starts to creak open slowly.
Sometimes, but often I get, I don't know. And then I have a third question, which always gets me to the answer, which is, well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to pretend you knew the answer and just tell me something. And guess what that is? That's the real answer that comes out because now we're pretending. And you can't yell at me when I'm pretending, but you can yell at me when I'm giving you a real answer.
It's very true. I mean, I can say that I've been very blessed in that my teams as well as my clients have always pushed for having a very open conversation.
Yes.
For the world
Yep.
of consulting, you have to. We're always basically standing on stage and we're performing. And
Yes.
so if we're not communicating and collaborating in how we execute and how we deliver, then we're definitely going to fall short of expectations. So I definitely see the whole notion of really cultivating those open conversations and getting past the I don't knows.
Yes. And it takes a long time to get there. It's not something, again, I developed this in my food service company back when I was 29, 30 years old. And I would never get an answer to a question because nobody wanted to get yelled at because that was my reputation. Nothing was ever my fault. I always blamed others or I justified why it wasn't me and it was you. And what people do then is they hide. They hide from you, they hide the mistakes they make, and your company runs about at 60%, maybe 50% efficiency as a result of that. And it's always the boss's fault. It's not the line worker's fault. They want to do a good job,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
they don't want to get yelled at.
Yeah, and it goes back to culture. It goes back to tone.
Right.
In my book, I do talk about that. The tone that's set at the top rolls downhill, and
Yes.
everyone starts to reflect the same type of mannerisms.
Yeah.
So to correct it makes it that much more difficult.
Yeah. There's
So,
some.
with
Yeah. You're absolutely correct about that. There's one of my favorite authors is a guy named Patrick Lencioni,
that,
and he wrote a great book called The Advantage. And in there he talks about four types of values that companies have. And the big mistake I see business owners make all the time is they'll say something that's an aspirational value, which they want to see in their company, but doesn't exist as a core value. I made that mistake. My value was personal responsibility. And I said, this is a core value. Well, I had not exhibited personal responsibility at all. So my team members wouldn't say it to me, but they said it to themselves. Well, that's pure BS. And it, if I had said, I need your help, this is a value I think is really important in our company. I'm not there yet, and I don't think we're there yet. But will you please, when I'm not being responsible, tell me I'm not? And I will tell you when I'm not being responsible and I notice it. And it's such an important thing to label your value correctly, in my opinion. Does that make sense to you?
absolutely. It's and I keep using the word absolute because a lot of your points I think are very on right on. Within the book, I talk about defining very clear objectives that
Yes.
everyone can understand in very simple terms,
Yes.
because it forces you to align your decisions, your actions, your behaviors in a manner and a way that follows that very simple, succinct mission, objective statement, whatever you want to call it. And on many occasions, I've seen really the body, the values, and the demeanor of the employees 100% reflected. But then I think you're completely correct. And I've had more than a fair share of clients where they have these beautiful mission statements, and they're not really following their own,
Yeah, they don't
the
walk the talk.
yeah, correct.
They don't walk the talk. So, hey, Jack, unfortunately, we're out of time. And
Ah,
yeah, it goes fast. Um, and I'm going to bet some folks are going to want to read your book and find out where they can find more about you. So, how do they go about doing that?
absolutely. The book is called The Decision Switch. The email, I'm not the email, but the web address is thedecisionswitch.com as well. And you can find my book on Amazon or through my website. And if you want to get in contact with me, there's lots of information about what I do and how to get a hold of me. So I'd love to hear from you, and I appreciate the
Cool.
time here.
Cool. Cool. I've got two things I want you to do. The first thing I've asked, I think, 410 times now, which is to go wherever you're listening to this podcast and give us an honest rating and review. If you love us, give us 5 stars. If you hate us, you can do what you want, but I'll cry and you won't know it. So that's okay, I guess. And the second thing is we have a program which I think is really, really important for private business owners. And the reason is you may have a false assumption about what financial freedom from your business means. Too many people tell me my business is my retirement plan. And the truth is, for most of us, that's not true. And we need other strategies. So we developed this program we call the Financial Freedom Accelerator. And the whole purpose of it is to help you become financially free from your business, which means that your freedom does not depend on the value of your business, it depends on you. If you're interested and want to learn more about it, it's really easy to do. You go to www.sustainablebusiness.co/freedom. That's www.sustainablebusiness.co/freedom. You'll see a bunch of information about the Financial Freedom Accelerator. And if you think this is something you might be interested in, you just click on the button that says Talk to Josh and we'll have a 20-minute conversation. You'll get some great value out of it, and we'll figure out whether the Financial Freedom Accelerator might be right for you. So this is Josh Patrick. We're with Jack Flaherty. You're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here really soon.